Psychic Shadows Chapter 1. The Silent Drive, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, August 12, 1968. The dashboard clock glowed a sickly red, 5:53 p.m. I hadn't spoken in exactly 2 weeks, 5 days, 7 hours, and 53 minutes. The cuffs bit into my wrists, cold and unyielding, as I shifted uncomfortably in the back seat of the Range Rover. My handler, a man named Carl with a face like weathered granite, kept his eyes fixed on the cracked asphalt of Interstate 79. The highway stretched ahead, one of the few still intact after the chaos that had torn through the country. Most roads were rubble now, swallowed by sinkholes or choked with the debris of collapsed cities. The radio crackled, spitting out the last notes of Elvis Presley's Hound Dog before Carl stabbed the dial with a calloused finger, switching to a news broadcast. Good afternoon. It's 5 p.m. time for your local and national news and weather forecast. The woman's voice buzzed through static, sharp and grating. I lunged forward, straining against the cuffs, desperate to silence it. Carl shot me a look. His eyes, cold and gray, carried a warning as clear as if he'd spoken it aloud. Don't even think about it. I sank back, my throat tightening. It had been days since I'd felt that suffocating choke, the sensation of inhaling smoke or drowning in molasses. But there it was, clawing at me again. The news anchor's voice droned on. It's been 6 months since the catastrophic Pittsburgh incident, and the aftermath continues to devastate survivors across the Northeast. Carl cranked the volume, and the words sliced through me like splintered glass. Reef Smallwood, the man responsible for the deaths of over 500,000 people, was sentenced to death yesterday and executed this morning by lethal injection. My handler's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close enough to make my stomach churn. He wanted a reaction. He always did. I stared at the dashboard clock. 5:59 p.m. Carl was middle-aged, his thick brown hair slicked back with gel that reeked of chemicals, burning the back of my nose. He wasn't a talker, just like me. A big guy, broad shoulders, round face, and a wedding ring he tried to hide in his pocket. I could see it anyway, glinting faintly when he shifted gears. Despite ongoing appeals from human rights activists claiming his innocence, the 24-year-old was executed today. The radio crackled again. According to officials, Smallwood's body will be returned to his family in the coming weeks. His brain has been donated for scientific research per federal law. My handler's eyes flicked to me, waiting. I resisted the urge to squeeze my eyes shut. He knew everything about me, what I'd done, why I was here, what was coming. I knew nothing about him, except that he'd been chosen for a reason. If I did, he'd already be dead. The windows were open, cold air blasting my face as I leaned toward the breeze. Outside, the ruins of Pittsburgh blurred past, collapsed steel mills, shattered row houses, sidewalks appended like broken teeth. The news anchor's voice faded into static as we entered a tunnel, and I savored the brief silence. It didn't last. In other news, the CDC has announced a possible link between. I glanced at the clock again. 6:03 p.m. 2 weeks, 5 days, 8 hours, and 9 minutes since I last spoke. I thought about what my first words might be. A plea for a lawyer? A scream for my parents? Or maybe just a curse to the world that had brought me here. Carl switched the station again, this time to a crackling rendition of Buddy Holly's Peggy Sue. He leaned back, a faint smile tugging at his lips as we passed a derelict Pizza Hut, its neon sign flickering weakly. I missed pizza, the burn of hot cheese, the crunch of crust. The building still stood, but its windows were blown out, its foundation crumbling like everything else. The car swerved suddenly, tires screeching. I jolted forward, the cuffs cutting deeper into my wrists. Ahead, the road plunged into a sinkhole, a gaping maw of nothingness. Carl cursed under his breath, yanking the wheel to the left. I settled back into the warm leather, my heart pounding. I knew cars, but I'd never ridden shotgun. Always in the back, cuffed or caged, sometimes tossed in the trunk like luggage. Always ready to follow orders. "Can we get a pizza?" I asked, my voice hoarse, surprising even myself. The words tasted like bile, heavy with memories I didn't want. Carl didn't look at me, but I caught the subtle shift in his posture. He was good at masking it, but I was better at reading him. "Before you kill me," I added, my eyes locked on the dashboard clock. 6:22 p.m. 8 minutes until my scheduled end, per his orders. Carl's lips twitched again, almost a smirk. "What kind of pizza?" he asked, gesturing ahead. "Look around, sweetheart. If you can point me to a functioning McDonald's, I'll get you a Happy Meal." He was right. There was nothing but a gray blur of concrete and ruin. No golden arches, no signs of life. Just the ticking clock, its red numbers glaring. 6:25 p.m. numbers were all I knew. I counted them constantly, ceiling tiles, heartbeats, seconds until death. It had been 2,489 days, 35 hours, 13 minutes, and 43 seconds since I'd had freshly made pizza. My mother used to make it from scratch, the cheese bubbling, the crust golden. I missed the burn of it on my tongue. You know, I said, keeping my eyes forward, even Ted Bundy got a final meal. Carl's smirk deepened. Where'd you learn that? Radio, I lied. I'd heard it somewhere, maybe in the facility, whispered between guards. He refused a final meal, so they gave him the default. Steak and eggs. Carl's gaze flicked to the road. You want a final meal? Sure. Tell me why you did it first. I had nothing left to lose. The clock read 6:27 p.m. 3 minutes. I didn't say what was clawing at my throat, the words I'd swallowed for years. Instead, I stayed still. Did you know that when you take a doll apart and put her back together, she's never quite the same? He sighed, his patience thinning. We'd entered a city, Youngstown, Ohio, maybe, though the signs were long gone. The ruins were the same, shattered hotels, nail salons reduced to rubble, a jagged crack tearing through the earth like a scar. I glanced at the clock. 6:29 p.m. 1 minute. Chapter 2. The Fourth Grade Incident, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, September 15, 1955. It started in the fourth grade, in a classroom that smelled of chalk dust and erasers. Mrs. Trescott was droning on about multiplication tables, her voice a monotonous hum that made my eyelids heavy. I was 10, sitting with my chin in my fist, a pen wedged between my teeth, when I noticed something strange. The clock on the wall didn't move when I stared at it. But when I looked away, the hands ticked forward as if time itself was playing tricks. Magic, I thought, my heart racing. I threw my hand up, eager to tell the class. Harper, Mrs. Trescott snapped, her eyes narrowing. Keep your thoughts to yourself. Stop daydreaming and start listening. My ears burned as the other kids giggled. I ducked my head, embarrassed but still buzzing with the discovery. Teachers didn't like me. I was too loud or too quiet, never the right balance. My report cards always said the same thing. Harper is a bright child, but she never listens. She's always in the clouds. She can't seem to make friends. I was listening, but I didn't understand. Words slipped through my mind like water through a sieve. I had one friend, Micah, but she drifted away, caught up in boys and lipstick while I hid in bathroom stalls with books. The other kids called me Harper Collins, a nickname that stung more than it should have. I was zipping up my backpack, eager to escape, when someone prodded my back. I turned to find Evie Hart, the class princess with her red pigtails and pink dresses. Our mothers had been friends when we were toddlers, forcing us into playdates that neither of us enjoyed. Evie liked dolls. I liked pirates. She'd always looked at me like I was something to squash. At her last slumber party, she'd pulled me aside and said, I don't like you, Harper. Tell your mom you don't like me. I'd been blunt, called her a horse-faced brat, and our mother's friendship crumbled. Evie was smiling now, a rare and dangerous thing. Hey, Harper, she said, her voice syrupy. She grabbed my shoulders and turned me toward Mrs. Trescott, who was helping Freddie with his backpack. I dare you to ask Mrs. Trescott what DL stands for. Before I could respond, a voice cut through the room. It means dumb loser, said Rafi, a freckled kid hunched over his comic book. Mrs. Trescott's head snapped up, her face darkening. What was that? She demanded. I just said what it means, Rafi muttered, chewing on his pencil. Detention, Rafi, Mrs. Trescott barked. And you too, Evelyn. You should know better. Rafi's eyes widened. But I was just, do you want me to call your father? She snapped. Rafi's mouth clamped shut, and he buried his head in his arms, groaning. Evie tried to pin the blame on me, but Mrs. Trescott wasn't having it. I don't care for playground politics, she said, dismissing us. That afternoon, the three of us sat in detention, the tension thick. Evie and Rafi whispered in the back, tapping their pens, while I slumped in the front, half asleep. I didn't see Mrs. Trescott reach into her desk. I didn't see her pull out the gun. But I felt the shift in the air, like a storm gathering. Her movements were mechanical, her eyes unblinking. She raised the gun to her mouth, and time slowed. The bang shattered the silence. Her body swayed, then collapsed onto her desk, blood blooming across the papers she'd been grading. I screamed, the sound tearing from my throat before I realized it was mine. Rafi's breaths came in sharp gasps, and Evie sat frozen, her eyes wide like a doll's. I dove under my desk, my hands clamped over my ears, but the gunshot echoed in my skull, relentless. Warm hands coaxed me to my feet, but I was still screaming. A stranger's voice broke through. "Harper, it's okay. You're safe." They led me outside, rain soaking my clothes. I barely registered the white van, or Evie and Rafi already inside, wrapped in blankets. A man with glasses knelt before us, his voice calm but cold. "I'm Dr. Wonder from the Children's Trauma Defense Division. You're going into witness protection, just for a few weeks. Think of it like a vacation." Chapter 3. The Facility Undisclosed Location, Pennsylvania, October 1955. The Children's Trauma Defense Division was no vacation. It was a sprawling complex of glass and steel, hidden somewhere in the Allegheny Mountains. The hallways were sterile, reeking of antiseptic, with checkerboard windows that led nowhere. My room was a white box with a bed, a desk, and no real windows, just mirrors that reflected my own hollow face. For 2 weeks, it felt almost bearable. There was a games room with a swimming pool, and I spent hours there, avoiding Evie and Rafi. Evie tried to gossip, asking if I thought Rafi was looking at her. I didn't care. Rafi was distant, his hands clenched into fists, his eyes staring through us. We didn't talk about what we'd seen. Evie had panic attacks, and Rafi slipped into trances whenever I brought it up. On the 15th day, a nurse woke me, not with breakfast, but with a tug into a small room. A plate of sunny-side-up eggs, toast, and orange juice waited on a table. Dr. Carolyn, a woman with sharp eyes and a clipboard, sat across from me. "What are your hobbies, Harper? Do you like counting? Can you count to 20? I was on my last bite when I felt a prick at the back of my neck. Ice flooded my veins, and my fork clattered to the plate. "Just something to make your mind less scary," Dr. Carolyn said, pressing a bandage over the injection site. It didn't get less scary. The pricks became daily, each one sharper, colder. On the 4th day, I vomited red specks, my stomach twisting, my head pounding. My body felt wrong, like I was a puppet on strings. I begged to go home, but the answer was always the same. "Not yet, Harper. Just a few more days." Days bled into weeks, then months. I was isolated, left in my room with no food or water for days at a time. Counting became my escape. I counted the ceiling tiles, 5,678.5. The floor tiles, 18,127. My own breaths, my heartbeats, anything to anchor me. Then the voices started, whispers that weren't mine, buzzing like static. The doctors called it idiopathic schizophrenia, a trauma response. But the voices grew louder, even through the drugs, the tubes, the surgeries. They shaved my head, submerged it in ice water, told me I'd feel better. I didn't doubt. By the time I saw Rafi again, a year had passed. He was cuffed, a bandage wrapped around his head, his hair longer and unkempt. "Hey, Harper," he said, his voice friendly but his other voice a growl, slamming into me with yellow and orange streaks. I saw his mind, a white room, a soda can, blood on his hands. Dr. Carolyn's voice snapped at him, and I felt his pain, sharp as knives in my skull. Evie was quieter when I saw her next, her eyes shadowed, her hair pulled into a ponytail. She sat cross-legged in the playroom, silent, while Rafi built Jenga towers and knocked them down without touching them. When Evie spoke, her voice was a croak. "Stop." Rafi froze, a brick in his hand. She apologized, tears in her eyes, but the damage was done. We weren't going home. Rafi had psychokinetic syndrome, moving objects with his mind. Evie had thiamine control disorder, her voice bending others to her will. I had neuromopathy, hearing thoughts as colors, tastes, explosions of light. We were diagnosed with psychic phenomena, a mutation triggered by the trauma of that day in 4th grade. The adults called it puberty, hormones, imagination. They lied. Chapter 4. The Wildfire Unit, Cleveland, Ohio, June 1960. By 17, we were the Wildfire Unit, a team of broken kids turned into weapons. I'd counted 258,789 ceiling tiles by then, my hair grown to my stomach, my hands scarred from clawing at my throat. I didn't remember why my room was smeared with blood, why I'd stopped looking in mirrors. I only remembered the eggs, the injections, the voices. Our first deployment was in Cleveland, tracking a drug dealer named Eddie Malone. I could smell him across town, his thoughts a deluge of green and brown, reeking of vomit. I led the chase, my mind hooked on his memories, abandoned at 8, surviving in grimy motels, used by women who saw him as a means to an end. Evie jumped from the Hummer, her hood up, her hands cuffed. The air turned cold, birds scattering as she screamed with that other voice, commanding Malone to stop. He didn't. Rafi was the last resort, dragged from the car with a muzzle and a bag over his head. With a glance, he flung Malone into a dumpster, then tore him apart when told to stop. Blood coated Rafi's face, his eyes unblinking, his snarls keeping everyone but his handler at bay. Evie grinned, her tongue gone, her other voice giggling in my head. "It's nice to see you again." Harper on the ride back. Rafi rested his head on my shoulder, his other voice a whisper I pretended not to hear. We were a team, hunting the worst of humanity, but we were the real monsters. The adults had made us this way, drugged, cut open, reprogrammed. They'd taken Evie's voice, turned Rafi into a weapon, and filled my head with voices I couldn't silence. Chapter 5. The Breaking Point, Youngstown, Ohio, August 12, 1968. Back in the Range Rover, the clock read 6:28 p.m. Carl pushed open the door, leading me into a rain-soaked alley. The gun's cold barrel pressed against my spine, but I wasn't afraid. The silence was a relief, no voices clawing at my mind. "Why'd you do it, kid?" Carl asked, reloading his weapon. Why did I do it? After years of needles, of watching Evie lose her tongue, of seeing Rafi become a beast? Why did I let Rafi out of his cage to shred Dr. Wilhelm's face? Why did Evie crawl into mines and tell them to die? Why did Rafi split the world in half with a panic attack? I laughed, closing my eyes. Because we're kids. We don't know any different. At 6:30 p.m., I heard her footsteps. Evie's other voice cut through the rain. "Put the gun in your mouth." Carl's resolve crumbled, his arms dropping. The gunshot didn't make me flinch, even as his blood splattered my neck. I turned to see Evie, tiny in a wedding dress, blood trickling from her nose. "Where's Rafi?" she asked that I didn't know. But I knew we weren't done. The wildfire unit wasn't finished burning. Chapter 6. The Aftermath, Eerie, Pennsylvania, September 1968. The weeks after Carl's death were a blur of motion. Evie and I fled Youngstown, moving north toward Eerie, where the ruins of the steel industry loomed like ghosts. Rafi was gone, taken by the division after the Pittsburgh incident. They called it a wildfire, but it was us. Our powers unleashed in a moment of rage and despair. 500,000 dead, the city reduced to rubble, and the three of us branded as monsters. Evie was silent now, her notepad filled with scribbled commands she was too afraid to speak. I counted everything, cracks in the pavement, raindrops on my skin, the seconds until they found us. The voices were louder now, a cacophony of colors and tastes, memories that weren't mine. A child's scream, a mother's grief, a city's collapse. We hid in an abandoned warehouse, the air thick with rust and mold. Evie wrote, "What do we do now?" I didn't have an answer. The division would come for us, their experiments too valuable to let escape. But we weren't their puppets anymore. We'd burned too much, broken too many of their chains. Chapter 7. The Final Stand, Buffalo, New York, October 1968. They found us in Buffalo, on the shores of Lake Erie. The division's vans rolled in at dawn, their headlights cutting through the fog. Evie stood beside me, her notepad clutched to her chest. I felt Rafi before I saw him, his mind a storm of red and black, tearing through the air. They'd brought him to finish us. The battle was chaos. Rafi's power shook the ground, sending cars and debris flying. Evie's voice, even without her tongue, compelled soldiers to turn on each other. I drowned in their thoughts, their fears, their pain, until I couldn't tell where I ended and they began. In the end, it was Rafi who stopped it. His scream split the sky, and the world fell silent. When the dust settled, he was gone, his body crumpled under a collapsed building. Evie and I stood alone, the division's forces decimated that we didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. We walked away, into the ruins of a world we'd helped destroy, counting the seconds until the next fight. Summary of Psychic Shadows. Introduction. Psychic Shadows is a sprawling, dark narrative set in mid-20th century America, spanning 1955 to 1968, primarily in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, with additional settings in Youngstown, Cleveland, Erie, and Buffalo. The story follows Harper Samuels, a young woman with psychic abilities, and her companions, Evie Hart and Rafi Smallwood, as they navigate a world that seeks to exploit their powers. Triggered by a traumatic event in their childhood, their abilities, labeled as neuromopathy, thiamine control disorder, and psychokinetic syndrome, make them both victims and weapons of a secretive government organization, the Children's Trauma Defense Division. The narrative explores themes of trauma, institutional abuse, rebellion, and the loss of innocence, set against a backdrop of a crumbling America marked by societal decay and physical destruction. The story culminates in a devastating act of rebellion known as the Pittsburgh Incident, where the trio's powers wreak havoc, killing 500,000 people and reshaping their destinies. Setting and context: the story unfolds in a dystopian version of the United States, where natural disasters, economic decline, and societal unrest have left cities like Pittsburgh in ruins by 1968. Highways are cracked, buildings are reduced to rubble, and sinkholes swallow entire roads. The timeline begins in 1955, during a seemingly innocent era of post-war prosperity, but quickly darkens as the characters' lives are upended by trauma and experimentation. The Children's Trauma Defense Division, a shadowy government entity, operates in a hidden facility in the Allegheny Mountains, where children with psychic mutations are studied and weaponized. The narrative's atmosphere is heavy with despair, punctuated by moments of fleeting hope and rebellion, as the characters grapple with their identities and the destruction they've caused. Main characters: Harper Samuels, the protagonist, a young woman who develops neuromopathy, the ability to hear others' thoughts as colors, tastes, and sensations. At 10, she witnesses her teacher's suicide, an event that triggers her powers. By 1968, at age 24, she is a haunted figure, counting everything: tiles, seconds, heartbeats, to cope with the voices in her head. Harper's journey is one of survival, marked by her struggle to retain her humanity amidst relentless experimentation and exploitation. Evie Hart, a former classmate of Harper's, Evie develops thiamine control disorder, allowing her to command others with her voice. Initially a popular girl with a cruel streak, Evie becomes a tragic figure, her tongue removed by the division to limit her power. Her silence and use of a notepad reflect her fear of her own abilities, yet she remains a fierce ally to Harper. Rafe Smallwood, another classmate, Rafe possesses psychokinetic syndrome, enabling him to move objects with his mind. His powers are volatile, often triggered by anger or distress, leading to catastrophic consequences. Rafe's transformation from a quiet boy to a weaponized attack dog is a central tragedy, culminating in his role in the Pittsburgh Incident and his eventual death. Carl, Harper's handler in 1968, a stoic, middle-aged man tasked with transporting her to her execution. His cold demeanor and hidden wedding ring hint at a personal life he keeps separate from his grim duties. Carl's interactions with Harper reveal his awareness of her crimes and his role in her fate. Dr. Carolyn and Dr. Wonder, scientists at the division, representing the institutional cruelty that shapes the trio's lives. Dr. Carolyn oversees Harper's experiments, while Dr. Wonder introduces the children to the facility under the guise of witness protection. Themes and analysis: Psychic Shadows is a meditation on trauma and its lasting impact. The suicide of Mrs. Trescott serves as the catalyst, awakening latent psychic abilities in Harper, Evie, and Rafe, but also marking them as targets for exploitation. The Children's Trauma Defense Division represents institutional abuse, using the guise of protection to experiment on vulnerable children. The trio's powers: Harper's neuromopathy, Evie's control, Rafe's telekinesis, are both a gift and a curse, amplifying their pain and isolating them from the world. The story critiques the dehumanization of children, portraying the adults as callous manipulators who dismiss the trio's suffering as hormones or imagination. The Pittsburgh Incident is the ultimate act of rebellion, a destructive release of years of torment, but it comes at the cost of countless lives. Harper's counting is a coping mechanism, a way to impose order on chaos, while Evie's silence and Rafe's rage reflect their own struggles to survive. The setting, a decaying America, mirrors the characters' internal collapse. Pittsburgh's ruins, with sinkholes and shattered buildings, symbolize the destruction wrought by both external forces and the trio's powers. The timeline, spanning 1955 to 1968, grounds the story in a period of social upheaval, with references to post-war prosperity giving way to dystopian decay, reflecting the loss of innocence. Character development: Harper begins as a curious, misunderstood child, her excitement over the clock's strange behavior crushed by authority. Her neuromopathy isolates her, filling her mind with others' pain, but also sharpens her perception, making her a skilled tracker. By 1968, she is hardened but not broken, her final act of defiance, surviving Carl's execution, showing her resilience. Evie transforms from a cruel, popular girl to a silent, haunted figure. Her thiamite control disorder makes her a weapon, but the removal of her tongue symbolizes the division's attempt to control her power. Her loyalty to Harper and Rafe, despite her fear, shows her growth from selfishness to solidarity. Rafe starts as a quiet, rebellious boy, his psychokinetic powers emerging as a response to trauma. The division's conditioning turns him into a volatile weapon, his rage culminating in the Pittsburgh incident. His death in Buffalo is a tragic end, but also a release from his torment. Carl, a stoic enforcer, Carl's cold efficiency masks a personal life hinted at by his wedding ring. His death at Evie's command underscores the trio's power, but also their moral ambiguity. His blood on Harper's neck is a stark reminder of their capacity for destruction. The conclusion, Psychic Shadows, is a harrowing tale of trauma, power, and rebellion. Harper, Evie, and Rafe are shaped by a single moment of violence in 1955, their lives forever altered by the division's experiments. Their powers, born from pain, become both their salvation and their curse, leading to the catastrophic Pittsburgh incident. The story ends on a note of ambiguous freedom, with Harper and Evie walking away from the wreckage. Their futures uncertain, but their bond unbreakable. The narrative's strength lies in its unflinching portrayal of institutional cruelty, the resilience of youth, and the cost of power in a broken world.